Morning, everyone. Let me begin by just acknowledging the sad passing of the Dean of the House of Representatives, Don Young. He loved Alaska. He loved the country. He loved the institution of the House of Representatives. And we certainly mourn his passing, and he will appropriately have the respectful send-off from the institution, the house that he loved, the People's House, today, as well as experiencing a send-off, a homegoing throughout the rest of the week. Our condolences we extend from the House Democratic Caucus to the Young family, to his constituents, and to all those who knew and loved an extraordinary, unique American character, and someone who served his constituents with passion and with vigorousness. We had a very active discussion in the House Democratic Caucus today. It's good to be back together with each other. We were briefed on some of the legislative bills that will be on the floor this week, including the MORE Act, which will be brought by Chairman Jerry Nadler. Americans across the political spectrum, particularly younger Americans, recognize that now is the time for cannabis reform. Be good for the economy, good for economic activity, good for public safety, good for social, racial, and economic justice. And hopefully we'll continue to see some Republican support for cannabis reform, perhaps in the form of voting yes for the MORE Act, and then we'll see what happens in the United States Senate. We also hope, and we'll get some further clarity from the Speaker, of course, and the Majority Leader, but we hope that at some point, Senate will send us legislation giving us the ability to set in motion a conference on the America Competes Act. We clearly need to address the supply chain issues that are confronting the American people in the context of this pandemic that we are still working through, and to make sure that America can continue to lead the global economy as we move forward throughout the balance, not just of this decade, but of this century. And we want to bring manufacturing jobs back home. We want to make chips here at home. And the House has a plan to do that. We look forward to working out the details with the United States Senate. Lastly, Representative Angie Craig, as part of our agenda to continue to lower costs for everyday Americans, is going to bring forward the Affordable Insulin Now Act, which will make sure that no American pays more than $35 a month for life-sustaining and life-saving insulin. We know that more than 100 million Americans are either diabetic or pre-diabetic. Many rely on insulin, but far too many Americans cannot afford it, paying thousands of dollars a year for a drug that has been around for approximately a century. That makes no sense. And we're going to do something about it this week, and hopefully our Republican colleagues will join us. We're committed to continuing to make life better for everyday Americans, to get stuff done for everyday Americans, to help everyday Americans. Hopefully our Republican colleagues will join us. I now yield to Vice Chair Pete Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are excited about the agenda that the chairman outlined, especially that life-saving bill. But last week, we also saw why Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson was eminently qualified to sit on the Supreme Court. During these hearings, we also saw the real Republican agenda on full display. no longer pretending to care about the economy or inflation, but talking about continued nonsense. Fixated on overturning Roe v. Wade and relitigating a ban on a fight for marriage equality. They even came up with a new list of books to ban. One Republican senator suggested that he would even support reinstating a prohibition on interracial marriage, which I have to say would create a lot of paperwork for my wife and I. Despite all the rhetoric from our House Republican friends down in Florida, this is what the Republican Party is at its core. They want to police what you read, how you live, and who you love. The American people have rejected their agenda in the past, and I'm confident that they'll do it again. House Democrats believe that there's much more that unites us than divides us, and the American people can celebrate our differences as one nation under God. We support the idea that everyone deserves a fair shot in our economy and that we need a fairer tax code that rewards hardworking people. Republicans believe in a tax code where billionaires pay less in taxes than a teacher or firefighter, and we think that that's just wrong. While House Republicans complain about insurrectionists getting banned on social media, House Democrats will continue to focus on the issues that matter most to working families, like a fair tax code, capping the cost of insulin, and decriminalizing marijuana. With that, we'll take some questions.
Thank you.
Congressman, there's been a wide range of views expressed about how to react to the recent revelation about Justice Clarence Thomas. Some people calling for recusal, investigation, resignation, censure, impeachment. I wonder if this came up at the caucus meeting at all and where leadership stands on that.
Well, the January 6th Select Committee is doing tremendous work as it relates to the preservation of our democracy, uncovering the truth of what happened on January 6th, and making sure that it can be presented to the American people in the fullest possible way. I'll yield to Vice Chair Aguilar for further clarity on that. But it is deeply troubling that the wife of a Supreme Court justice appears to have been intimately involved in peddling the big lie, perhaps fanning the flames of the insurrection, and being involved in issues that clearly fall before the jurisdiction of a member of the United States Supreme Court. So this is a serious issue that needs to be explored. It is my hope that it'll be explored by the Judiciary Committee in terms of its areas of jurisdiction related to ethical conduct by Supreme Court justices, because no one is above the law. We have three separate and co-equal branches of government, and we need to look at the dynamics that were revealed by the communications between Mrs. Thomas and former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows.
The chairman mentioned that the Judiciary Committee may have continued conversations about this, and we will allow that to move forward, clearly and support those efforts. Specific to January 6th, I think it's important, and I know people want to talk about this yesterday, but the Carter ruling in California really does, from my perspective and the committee's perspective, crystallize what's at stake. And we know that there is news, that this is a newsworthy individual, but the specific ruling was just striking. And I'll quote it. If Dr. Eastman and President Trump's plan had worked, it would have permanently ended the peaceful transfer of power, undermining American democracy and the Constitution. If the country does not commit to investigating and pursuing accountability for those responsible, the court fears January 6th will repeat itself. That's what's at stake. That's why we're following House Resolution 503, to follow the facts, to chase down every possible lead. Nobody is above the law, as the chairman said, and we're going to treat individuals the same, no matter who they are. We're going to continue to face the facts. That's why Peter Navarro and Dan Scavino were on the receiving end of a contempt citation last night. And that's why we're going to continue to press forward and seek the truth and find the facts. That's exactly what House Resolution 503, that's what the committee is lockstep behind. If there is more to announce, the chairman will announce it. But at this point, we're focused on just continuing down the road that we've gone.
Can I follow up on that? Can I follow up on that while you're up there?
Yeah, Gary, go ahead.
I mean, there's been a ton of news out of this committee. Obviously, everybody's got kind of the clock in their heads, both of the stuff that chairman said publicly about wanting to move to different phases, and obviously the midterms. Overall, where is this investigation right now?
We're still in the investigative phase. We're still gathering evidence. We're still chasing leads. We're still asking for interviews of witnesses who know things about the president, the former president's activities, about some of the planning that went into January 6th. Each line of inquiry is making progress in that regard. And so that's where we are at. The chairman will announce when our hearing schedule is. But in the meantime, we're doing multiple interviews per week, and the committee knows exactly where we're going, and we're continuing down that road. There's no daylight between where we are and the strategy that we're implementing, and we're going to continue to focus down this road.
Mr. Vice Chair, with respect to some of the evidence that the committee does have in these White House call logs and this gap in time, what do you think the former president was doing during this time period, during these 7 hours and 37 minutes?
Well, quite a few gaps, both within, has been reported within the schedule. And as you saw Vice Chair Cheney talk about in the past 187 minutes when there was no activity. And reportedly, the former president was watching this, unfold, this attack on the Capitol and not lifting a finger. So we need to know, as we've said consistently, what was happening during that time. And so that's what our lines of inquiry are about, in addition to the funders and how the events of January 5th and January 6th happened from a rally perspective. Why didn't anyone lift a finger down at 1600 Pennsylvania to help us? But those are the questions that we have. And clearly the timeline that we've had from NARA for some time, clearly that's been a part of our discussions with other witnesses who we have inquired about that specific time block, those two time blocks, the one that you're talking about, the gap in the diary, and then the second, the lack of any activity at all, or movement by the former president. So those are things that we are getting to the bottom of.
Do you think the former president was using a burner phone?
I'm not going to speculate on what was happening, but we know he was communicating, right? We know that from open source, public reporting. Leader McCarthy indicated he had a phone call that doesn't show up on those logs. Clearly, there's a lot that's missing that deserves the truth, and we would hope that anybody who has information would come forward. Clearly, some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have been less than forthcoming, and that's unfortunate, given especially what the judge ruled. It seems that type of behavior only enables the possibility that this could happen again.
Hold on. I know we haven't been together in a while, but let's restore a little order to the questioning.
Thank you. And either one of you can field this here, but considering on the 1-6 committee questions, we heard from many of the members last night saying, we wish that the Justice Department would do its job. Is that an implication that the committee is disappointed that they have not prosecuted Mark Meadows based on the contempt citation passed here last December? And is this an effort to pressure DOJ to advance that, particularly as the Scavino and the Navarro contempt resolutions go to DOJ?
Well, let me just say, democracy and preserving it is not an exercise of ordering fast food, right? This is a serious situation that we are confronting. The former president of the United States incited a violent insurrection and attack on the Capitol. The mob was there to assassinate Speaker Pelosi, hang Mike Pence, and hunt down members of Congress. They urinated, defecated, and desecrated the Capitol grounds. 140 officers were seriously injured. Some lost their lives. It appears that the conspiracy to perpetrate the big lie not only goes all the way to the top, but could involve people in high levels of government. And the approach that the January 6th committee has taken has been to follow the facts, apply the law, and be guided by the Constitution, not operate under false deadlines and timeframes that would render their work incomplete. The Justice Department also has a similar responsibility to take this seriously, because this was an attempted coup to halt the peaceful transfer of power, to deprive the American people of the ability to choose who should be the president of the United States of America. Because the cult shouldn't be the ones to determine that, or the twice impeached, disgraced former president. So I don't think there's impatience that I have sensed from within the House Democratic Caucus as it relates to activity from anyone involved, because every time the January 6th committee pulls out a different thread, more is exposed. And at the end of the day, we're looking forward to a full and complete picture without fear or favor of what actually happened on January 6th, why it happened, and how do we prevent it from ever happening again. Pete.
Just briefly, I agree with what the chairman said. I think we all want to make sure that we're committed to democracy and that we're committed to the accountability that Judge Carter talked about in his ruling. We know that this Department of Justice feels that way. We know that they have acted on that with the Steve Bannon contempt citation. We hope that they act on it with the Meadows citation and with others that could follow. Our job, our responsibility is to make sure that contempt report has as much information as possible so they can do what they need to do. So the House can vote on official contempt, and then the Department of Justice can do what we hope would be, guided by the facts, guided by the law, and guided by the continued support of democracy. And so we need to make sure that's on us to make sure that report and that contempt report is good enough to meet that standard. We feel that we have done that. We're going to continue to make sure that those documents are solid to give them the ability to make that next step.
The DOJ must not be very impressed with the Meadows citation if they've sat on it since the middle of December and they moved in a couple of days on Steve.
Sure. Yeah. And look, and that's a question for them. All I would tell you is yeah, we did. We still feel strongly, Chad. And what I'll tell you is, with Bannon, it was very clear he didn't show up. He didn't acknowledge us. He didn't do anything and lift a finger to engage. With Meadows, he did engage, right? He gave us thousands of texts. Thank you, Mark Meadows and his attorney. We think that there, is other information that he has, that he's published in his book that is relevant to the committee's work product. And we wanted him to come in. And he was planning to do that until President Trump put out statements and then pulled him back a bit. And so, but it is different. Each of these will be different. And so that's what I would tell you. And so the Department of Justice has to exercise their own ability, their own guidance and metric. But our job is to make sure that those reports are solid, that the House votes on, that the Department of Justice can act on.
To follow up on Andrew's question from earlier, I mean, do you think that Justice Clarence Thomas should at least recuse himself from January 6th related cases?
I think there's a reasonable argument to be made that should happen. I'll reserve comment beyond that until I'm able to review both some of the decisions that he has rendered in this space already, some of which, of course, have been publicly discussed and are deeply troubling, as well as, the full nature of the exchanges between Jeannie Thomas and Mark Meadows. Third row. Thanks.
On the budget that came out yesterday, President Biden said it's a statement of his values. Among those things was an increase in the defense budget, an increase in funding for law enforcement, which some progressives have expressed concerns about. Do you have any concerns of your own about those increases or thoughts on how those might be reconciled within the caucus?
Yeah, I'm headed up to the Budget Committee meeting right after this, and I look forward to engaging with Director Young about the full scope of the budget. When we were in New York with President Biden, I supported his articulation of what needed to be done in the area of public safety. One, that we have to strengthen the relationship between the police and the community. That is certainly the right approach. And invest in neighborhood policing and law enforcement efforts that bring the police closer to the community, while at the same time making sure that there is accountability when police officers cross the line and engage in conduct that is dishonorable to the police, to the force, and to the communities that they represent.
I wanted to ask a little bit about the U.S.-China bill now that it has passed the Senate. Can you give a timeline for what the House's next steps are? When might people actually be named to a conference committee?
Are you referring to?
The competes or endless frontier,
Okay.
whatever the.
The bill
Okay.
of 1,000 names.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't think we call it the U.S.-China bill, so I was a little confused.
Not yet.
But as it relates to the Competes Act, which we passed in the House of Representatives, Leader Hoyer can provide additional clarity on that, but he did express hopefulness that we'll see some activity later on this week, and we'll be in a position to then thereafter proceed to conference.
Can you give any clarity on what that action will be later this week?
I think that's a question best asked of Leader Hoyer.
Question on the economy, please. How can Democrats avoid being blamed by Republican candidates for inflation and the prospect of recession as they head out on the campaign trip?
Well, Joe Biden has done a very good job under difficult circumstances as it relates to the economy. The fastest rate of economic growth in 40 years. 7.4 million good-paying jobs created during the president's first 14 months in office. That's a record in American presidential history. Unemployment went from 6.4 or so percent down to 3.8% during President Biden's first year in office in record time. Wages are up, and all of that was accomplished while reducing the deficit by more than $350 billion. Republicans lie about the economy, lie about President Biden's record, are lying about the causes of gas prices. They'd rather sort of elevate the pro-Putin wing of the House Republican Conference than blame Vladimir Putin for the price increases that we are seeing at the pump. This is who House Republicans have become, and they have no plan to deal with inflation and to lower costs for everyday Americans. We do. We're going to lower the cost of insulin by moving on legislation this week, lower the high price of life-saving prescription drugs. We're going to lower child care costs, home care costs. We have a plan to lower education costs. All of that is reflected in President Biden's budget. And so we believe that when the full story of this economy, free of Republican distortion, is told, that we will be in a strong position over the next several months when we engage. Republicans don't legislate. They articulate talking points. Did a single legislative idea come out of the so-called retreat that took place, that the cult held down in Florida last week? Did a single legislative idea come out? The answer would be no. Did they denounce the pro-Putin caucus? Did they denounce the pro-insurrection caucus? Did they denounce the pro-hate caucus down at the so-called Republican retreat? The answer would be no. So we're looking forward to sharing with the American people what President Biden and Democrats have accomplished in terms of the economy. More importantly, what our vision is to lower costs and confront inflation and gas prices, and to point out who the cult really is and why it will be dangerous to hand over any semblance of power to them next year. Actually, you haven't spoken.
The CDC is evaluating this week whether to end Title 42, the public health order, by the administration administration to turn away migrants at the border. Given the easing of coronavirus restrictions elsewhere in the country, should the Biden administration end this policy?
Well, one of the champions of immigration reform within the caucus is Vice Chair Aguilar, so let me yield to him.
I think it's important that whatever steps we do, we have plans to deal with the potential eventualities of what those plans could yield. And so clearly we need to work with the administration to make sure if they do eliminate Title 42, that they have a plan to address it, both from a public health perspective as well as from the perspective of Customs and Border Patrol, and making sure that we can process individuals. And this administration has led with the perspective, rightfully so, that individuals fleeing have an opportunity to present their case for asylum. And that doesn't always mean with immigration judges. It means in a mindful and thoughtful way. And so that's what they have been doing. When we support those efforts, we support them reforming the process and making sure that individuals receive a decision and justice based on their own individual circumstances. But that has to start with a plan to execute the idea, to execute the policy, and to deal with the outcomes of that policy change. And so we support them moving forward, and we hope that Congress is a part of that, both from a financial and fiscal perspective, as well as a humanity perspective. And so that's what we look forward to hearing.
Last question.
My understanding is you're meeting with the New York City mayor, you and other members from New York City this evening. I'm curious, my understanding part of the conversation is kind of about the COVID relief package and supplemental. Do you have any sense of what the implication would be back home or in other parts of the state if that is not acted upon? And what are its chances at this point?
You have a better understanding of my schedule than I do, because I was unaware of that meeting, though it's quite possible. I live from hour to hour in this place, and we do. I speak with the administration quite frequently, talked to the mayor's chief of staff a day or so ago. And, I'm confident that we're going to do what is necessary to ensure that the COVID relief that we have consistently provided out of Washington since the CARES Act through the American Rescue Plan will continue until we crush this virus.
What would it mean back home if it isn't acted upon?
We will act upon it. Thank you very much, everyone.
You're not supposed to tell them how the sausage is. Schedule is the most important.